39 alone, childless, and still bitter. I chose your sister over you. That was the first thing Trevor Sterling said to me at my father's funeral. Not hello, not I'm sorry for your loss, just that he stood there in the lobby of Oak Ridge Memorial Chapel like he was proud of himself. Dark charcoal suit, expensive watch peeking out from under his sleeve, that same smug little half smile I used to mistake for confidence back when I was stupid enough to love him. Have you ever experienced someone trying to kick you while you were already grieving at rock bottom? Drop a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Let's see who's standing with us today. Beside Trevor, my stepsister Brooke tightened her grip on his arm. She sneered at my black cardigan, her eyes scanning me like I was a bad investment she had successfully liquidated. 8 years ago, they had canceled my wedding and hijacked my future. Now, they were standing next to my father's casket, waiting for me to shatter. I didn't cry. I didn't break down or ask why they chose this sacred moment to be merciless. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was entirely clinical. I rubbed my tired eyes, trying to summon a shred of regret, but there was only absolute clarity. This wasn't a family breakdown. It was a balance sheet, and I was finally ready to audit the past. Before Trevor could open his mouth to deliver another rehearsed arrogant insult, the heavy mahogany doors of the chapel swung open. The humid Savannah rain poured into the foyer, contrasting sharply with the warm light and the smell of funeral lilies. Everyone turned. Julian Hayes stepped through the doorway. Everyone in the coastal Georgia business sector knew Julian. He was the founder of a massive tech infrastructure firm and a prominent civic patron. His net worth made Trevor's commercial development aspirations look trivial. But Julian wasn't here to network. He was holding the hand of a 2-year-old girl. Maya wore a yellow raincoat and pink boots. She scanned the dark room, and then she spotted me. "Auntie Morgan," she called out. The silence in the chapel was deafening. Brooke's designer handbag slipped off her shoulder and hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, undeniable crack. Trevor blinked rapidly. The smug half-smile wiped clean off his face. Julian walked toward me with steady, deliberate steps. He completely ignored the whispering crowd. Maya ran the last few steps and wrapped her small arms tightly around my leg. I rested my hand on her head, looking at the two people who thought they had destroyed me. Julian reached inside his tailored coat. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope and handed it to me. "Your father entrusted me with this," he said clearly. "He wanted you to have it today." The balance of power flipped instantly. Trevor looked completely paralyzed. Brooke looked terrified. I took the envelope. The retaliation had officially begun. I stepped into the quiet memorial office, leaving the crowded chapel behind. Julian followed, closing the door and sealing out the whispers. I sat at the polished oak desk and opened the cream envelope. Inside were copies of bank transfers, a receipt from an imaging clinic in Brunswick, and a handwritten letter from my late father, David Vance. The note was painfully brief. I should have asked harder questions 8 years ago. I thought my silence kept the peace, but I was wrong. "I am sorry my silence cost you everything. Here is the truth." I stared at the dark ink. For 8 years, I had been the palliative care lead nurse at our local hospital, working 60-hour shifts. I managed my father's terminal lung cancer, administered his medications, and managed his estate affairs, all while the small town of Savannah whispered that Trevor had abandoned me because I was inadequate. People always wondered why I never fought back, why I swallowed the humiliation while Trevor and Brooke played the elite happy couple around town. They thought my silence was weakness, but endurance is not defeat. Enduring chronic public shame while keeping a dying man comfortable is not submission. It is a survival mechanism. It is the invisible chain of the survivor. I did not have the luxury of an emotional collapse. I had a father who couldn't breathe and a grueling job that required absolute focus. My silence was an active, calculated waiting period. I folded the letter. Julian sat across from me, Maya coloring on a piece of scrap paper at his feet. We met at the Riverbend Children's Grief Center 3 years ago. I volunteered there to help children process loss, finding it easier than processing my own. Julian was a quiet donor, and Maya was his orphaned niece. She had clung to me during a session, deciding I was her safe harbor. That bond was forged in shared survival. Now, Julian was handing me the ammunition I needed to survive this family. The bank transfers showed $15,000 moving from Brooke's account to a woman named Denise Albright. The date was exactly 2 weeks before my canceled wedding. The Brunswick clinic receipt matched the timeline of Brooke's sudden, miraculous pregnancy announcement, the pregnancy she conveniently lost right after marrying my ex-fiancé. It was a paper trail of absolute betrayal. This wasn't a family tragedy anymore. It was a forensic audit. My father's terminal decline had blinded him, but his final act was leaving me the ledger. I looked up at Julian. The numbers are aligning, I said quietly. Julian leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but lethal. I ran some preliminary checks on Trevor's businesses, he replied. He is not the king of the coastal developments. He is drowning. I looked back at the $15,000 transfer. Brooke had not stolen my fiancé out of sudden love. She had executed an acquisition. Trevor was merely the asset she needed to secure her place in the family hierarchy. But they had made a critical miscalculation. They assumed I would just keep taking the losses. They were wrong. I placed the documents back in the envelope. The waiting period was over. I walked back into the reception hall with the envelope secured in my bag. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and weak coffee. Trevor intercepted me near the memorial guest book. His face was flushed, the arrogant veneer completely stripped away by panic. "Who is that child?" he demanded, stepping into my personal space. "And what is Julian Hayes doing here?" I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. "You are a guest at my father's funeral, Trevor. Do not interrogate me." Julian stepped up beside me, his physical presence easily dwarfing Trevor's. Trevor recognized the shift in authority immediately. Half of Trevor's business creditors answered to Julian's board. Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You are blocking the walkway, Trevor," Julian stated smoothly. Trevor swallowed hard, took a step back, and melted into the crowd. A moment later, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A voicemail from Brooke. I stepped into the hallway and pressed play. "Morgan, you need to stop digging into past family business if you know what is good for you. Do not embarrass us." The desperation in her voice was palpable. She wasn't commanding me. She was panicking. The next morning, I did not go to the hospital. Julian and I drove 30 minutes out to Pooler, Georgia. The address from the bank transfer led us to a faded modular home sitting at the end of a gravel driveway. The coastal humidity was already suffocating at 9 in the morning. I knocked on the aluminum door. A woman in her 50s with tired eyes answered. "Denise Albright." She looked at Julian's tailored suit, then at me, and her shoulders slumped. "You are David Vance's daughter," she said, resignation heavy in her voice. I didn't offer a polite smile. "I am executing my father's estate," I said. "We have the bank records showing a $15,000 transfer from my stepsister. We can do this in your living room. Or we can do this with the estate lawyers and fraud investigators. Your choice." Denise opened the door wider. Her living room smelled like stale tobacco and cheap vanilla air fresheners. I didn't sit down. She paced nervously near a worn-out recliner. "Your sister paid me," Denise confessed, her voice trembling. "I worked reception at the imaging clinic. She needed official-looking paperwork, pathology letters, ultrasound printouts. She paid me $15,000 to forge them so she could trap her fiancé. The clinical precision of the fraud hit me. 8 years ago, I had spent nights crying on my bathroom floor, believing I wasn't enough, believing Trevor had left me because Brooke was carrying his child. It was all a fabricated transaction. "Will you sign a sworn affidavit?" Julian asked quietly. Denise looked terrified. "Will you protect me from prosecution if I do?" I looked at this woman who had sold my future for $15,000. I felt no rage, only a cold, mechanical drive for closure. "Sign the confession," and the estate will not pursue charges against you, I promised. She nodded, tears spilling over her cheeks. The foundation of Brooke and Trevor's entire marriage was a forged medical document. Now, I held the receipt. We sat in Julian's downtown office later that afternoon. The air conditioning hummed quietly as Julian spread a stack of financial filings across his glass desk. Trevor's corporate facade was an illusion. Julian tapped a red pen against a printed spreadsheet. Trevor is carrying $680,000 in defaulted municipal loans. His commercial development firm is completely insolvent. He has been moving money between shell companies just to make the minimum payments on his leased cars. I reviewed the balance sheets. The math was brutally clear. Trevor didn't leave me for love or a baby. He left me because he was bankrupt, and my family represented a financial bailout. But the true scope of the betrayal didn't solidify until Denise Albright emailed the additional documents she had promised. Julian printed them out, and we stared at the paperwork in silence. It wasn't just the forged ultrasound. Denise had provided a copy of an early draft of a power of attorney. Brooke had forged my father's signature on it 6 months ago, right when his chemotherapy treatments had incapacitated him. I traced the forged signature with my index finger. My father owned 4 waterfront distribution warehouses along the Savannah Maritime Trade Docks. They were valued at $4.8 million. Brooke had used the forged power of attorney to secretly siphon off the commercial dock rental revenue while my father was too sick to check his accounts. Trevor and Brooke's entire 8-year marriage had been a calculated, predatory gambit. They had faked a pregnancy to merge the families, waited for my father to get sick, and were now systematically bleeding his estate dry. They were waiting for his death to inherit the $4.8 million portfolio, which would finally clear Trevor's massive debts. They were not just toxic family members. They were white-collar criminals. The anger I felt was absolute, refined, and entirely devoid of sorrow. This was no longer about a broken engagement. This was about the systematic theft of my father's legacy. Brooke and Trevor paraded around Savannah in designer clothes, playing the elite socialites while funding their lifestyle through forgery and elder abuse. I looked at Julian. He was watching me carefully, waiting for my directive. We are not just going to confront them, I said, gathering the documents into a neat, perfectly aligned stack. We are going to liquidate their entire social and financial standing. I slid the forged power of attorney into my leather portfolio. I had been the silent investor in their version of family, paying the emotional taxes while they extracted all the value. Now I realized it had been a hostile takeover, with me footing the bill. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. Julian handed me the final stack of printouts. The trap was set. The Savannah Harbor Maritime Foundation annual gala was in 2 days. Trevor's primary investors would be there. It was the perfect venue for a foreclosure. The Savannah Harbor Maritime Foundation annual gala was a masterclass in coastal elite pretense. Chandeliers cast a golden glow over polished marble floors. Waiters circulated with champagne while men in tuxedos discussed maritime trade routes. Trevor and Brooke were holding court near the center ice sculpture. Brooke wore a custom emerald gown. Trevor laughed loudly with a group of local financiers, projecting the image of a wealthy visionary. Julian and I did not make a dramatic entrance. We walked in quietly, accompanied by Harold Benton, my father's estate attorney. I carried a simple leather portfolio. Brooke spotted me instantly. She excused herself from the investors and marched toward us, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble. "What are you doing here, Morgan?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but venomous. "This is an exclusive event. You cannot just gate crash to embarrass us." Trevor noticed the commotion and stepped over, his investors trailing slightly behind him. "Morgan, you need to leave," Trevor said smoothly. "You are making a scene." I opened the leather portfolio. "I am not making a scene, Trevor. I am closing an account." I handed the first document directly to his lead investor. "This is a sworn affidavit from a medical receptionist confirming Brooke paid $15,000 to forge ultrasound printouts 8 years ago. There was no pregnancy. The investor frowned, reading the paper. Brooke's face lost all its color. "That is a lie," she stammered. I pulled out the next document, and these are the public filings showing Trevor Sterling is carrying $680,000 in defaulted municipal debt. He is entirely insolvent. The silence that fell over their circle was absolute. The investors stared at Trevor, who stood paralyzed, his jaw working silently. This is the hollow power of the least persona. Narcissistic abusers confuse performative luxury with intrinsic character. They flaunt leased watches and designer gowns, believing that looking wealthy makes them untouchable. But status built on debt and deceit is a fragile mirage. The moment you introduce objective, documented reality, their entire identity collapses because there is nothing underneath. Harold Benton stepped forward, clearing his throat. The investors leaned in. As the executor of David Vance's estate, I must inform you that Brooke Vance forged a power of attorney to siphon dock rental revenues. Criminal charges are being filed. Brooke let out a strangled gasp. Harold adjusted his glasses. Furthermore, David Vance's final will leaves all $4.8 million of his waterfront distribution warehouses exclusively to Morgan Vance under a mandatory 5-year direct management trust. Brooke and Trevor get absolutely nothing. Trevor looked physically sick. The financiers immediately turned their backs on him, distancing themselves from a toxic asset. Brooke spun around to flee the humiliation. As she pivoted, her designer heel snapped on the marble floor with a sharp crack. She stumbled, catching herself on a cocktail table, her glamorous facade utterly destroyed. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply closed my portfolio. The audit was complete. The collapse of the Sterling Empire was swift and entirely legal. Within 30 days, Trevor's commercial development contracts were unilaterally revoked by his financiers. Fraud investigations were formally opened against Brooke for the siphoned warehouse revenue. Faced with mounting legal fees and complete social exile, their marriage disintegrated into a series of bitter, highly publicized lawsuits. They turned on each other, tearing apart whatever remained of their leased lives. I did not watch the wreckage. I had better things to do with my time. I submitted my resignation at the palliative care center. For 8 years, I had exhausted myself nursing the dying and absorbing my family's cruelty. Now, I had a $4.8 million maritime estate to manage. I took over the waterfront distribution warehouses, auditing every ledger and repairing the neglected infrastructure. But I did not hoard the wealth. True vindication is not found in petty destruction. It is found in the justice of the sower. Retaliation burns the ground, but constructive redemption plants new seeds. I took Warehouse 3, a massive climate-controlled facility facing the deepwater docks, and converted it into a nonprofit specialized hospice transit hub. We provided free, comfortable medical transport for terminal patients across the Georgia coast. I took the very trauma of my 8 years of caregiving and forged it into a system of community empowerment. Every time a specialized transport van rolled out of my warehouse, it was a quiet victory over the people who had tried to break me. I walked through the massive loading bays, clipboard in hand, reviewing the shipping manifests. The smell of the ocean and diesel fuel was a constant reminder of ownership and control. Brooke and Trevor were spending their days sitting in deposition rooms, fighting over the scraps of their fraudulent existence. I was spending my days signing logistics contracts and expanding our medical transit routes. They had spent 8 years stealing my joy, but they could not steal my competence. Julian was beside me through the entire transition. He didn't try to take over my business, and he didn't treat me like a fragile victim. He offered strategic advice when asked and brought Maya down to the docks on Friday afternoons. We built a partnership grounded in mutual respect, quiet strength, and shared values. Maya learned to walk along the wooden piers, holding my hand, calling me Auntie Morgan, with a permanence that healed the oldest parts of my heart. The whispering in Savannah stopped. The town that had once pitied the abandoned nurse now did business with the owner of the Vance Maritime Trust. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. The infrastructure I was building spoke louder than any small town gossip ever could. I had endured the silence, unmasked the fraud, and now I was watching the harvest grow. On a warm Tuesday morning, Maya and I visited Oak Ridge Memorial Cemetery. The Georgia sun filtered through the Spanish moss as we walked toward my father's headstone. Maya knelt in the grass and carefully placed a crayon drawing of a bright yellow sun against the granite marker. I smoothed her hair, feeling a profound, steady peace settle in my chest. There were no tears today. The accounts were settled. My father's fatal flaw had been his silence, his tragic belief that ignoring toxicity would somehow keep the peace. But standing there, I realized that true peace never comes from appeasing abusers. I knelt beside the granite headstone and took a deep breath. The anger that had fueled my methodical retaliation had completely evaporated, replaced by a quiet, unshakable serenity. Julian stood a few feet away, watching us with that patient, supportive gaze I had come to rely on. We were a family built on shared survival and chosen loyalty, not fabricated obligations. I've come to realize that real closure doesn't require shouting in parking lots or begging for apologies that will never be sincere. Toxic family members often interpret a gentle person's silence as weakness. They mistake endurance for submission. They don't understand that stepping into your own financial and emotional authority is the only retaliation that permanently disarms a narcissist. Cutting toxic ties is not an act of cruelty. It is a fundamental act of survival. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. But forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. It means accepting that their performative entitlement will never match your durable character and deciding to walk away to protect your own light. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep people warm when those same people would complain about the smoke. I took Maya's hand and we walked back down the shaded path toward the harbor. I had spent my 30s carrying the weight of false promises and fabricated shame. I would spend my 40s building a legacy of truth, surrounded by the family I had chosen. If this story reminded you of the quiet strength it takes to rebuild your life after being discarded and betrayed, share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and leave your thoughts in the comments below.